Hello, hello and welcome. Welcome to another edition of Atlas Information Live. I'm your host, Atlas Alex. And just before we begin, I'm going to do a quick sound check because we had issues last week. And let's see if, for whatever reason, we can. I just want to see if the sound is working. No, I had the same problems I was having last week. And that doesn't do anything. Okay. Wonder if this makes any difference. No. So what about this one? Okay, so it looks like we're going to have to stick with the webcam microphone again this week. And I don't know what the problem is. It's most likely a Windows issue or something is broken with my microphone because I rebooted the computer just before just before I started the live stream. I shut down everything. I restarted the computer. It might require a hard restart or something. I don't know. But anyway, so we have technical issues with my other microphone, just like we did last week. So I'm glad I tested it right off the bat. So I apologize for that. I'm gonna be speaking to you again through my webcam microphone, which is not the best, but it is what it is, and we'll have to work with what we have to work with until I can figure out. Unfortunately, um, it's StreamYard's. It could be a StreamYard's problem, which is the streaming platform that I use. Although I doubt it because my webcam microphone works, so it's most likely a Windows issue, and really I can only. It doesn't help for me to test it the day before or whatever because things can change. Like it can work 24 hours before, and then for whatever reason, it doesn't want to work during the live stream. So the only way to be sure is to like reboot everything, make sure everything is clean, and then start the live stream after and see if it works. And it's not working. So I apologize for that. But on to today's topic, which is one which, frankly, is entirely what's the word I'm looking for? Underappreciated and under-discussed. In fact, it is outright avoided, particularly in the New Age and other spiritual circles where people say it doesn't exist. Death is not real. Death doesn't exist. There's no such thing as death. Death is an illusion. And then, of course, these people believe that because they want to avoid it. Yangsheng, are you saying you can't hear me? The sound is too quiet? Let's see if I can boost that somehow. Is that any better? Let me know if that's any better. So again, we're talking about death today because most people avoid it, and in spiritual circles, they love to avoid it. They love to say it doesn't exist. That there's no such thing as death. Nobody really dies. Nothing really dies. We just are released from the physical plane, and we go back to whence we came from, wherever that may be, to heaven or wherever that may be, whatever they imagine these supernal worlds to be like. And most of them, they if they imagine something, it's because they've taken psychedelics or who knows what, and then so they believe they know what the supernal worlds are like, or but they've had some lucid dreams, and because that's why everybody in the New Age, they always talk about 5D ascension, because they believe that the astral plane is heaven. Well, of course, the astral plane is not heaven. It is just an aspect of the supernal worlds. It's the emotional and mental plane. But it is by no means is it the end of your journey. It's just another level, another realm to experience and to overcome, and essentially to escape, to transcend. There's another level of transcendence past the astral plane. And in fact, when they talk about 5D ascension, that is, ascension does not refer to the fifth dimension. But regardless, I don't want to get into the weeds on all of that right now, because all of that is beyond death, and you must attain those levels. Those levels are not guaranteed. Those levels are not automatic. And the only way to attain those levels is through death. Death is real. Death is necessary. Death is an absolute, inevitable aspect of life. You cannot have life without death. The very idea or notion that you can is the utmost profound ignorance. That you might ask, well then, why are all these people avoiding death? Why do they even want to avoid the topic? Well, that's because of their fear and because of their ego. Because there's a finality about death, and as it relates to mechanical nature, as we all know, physical things die. Physical things break down. The law of entropy is absolute on the plane of physicality. Nothing lasts forever in this 3D reality that we experience, in the world of form. Everything is corporeal and mortal. It will die. It will return to dust. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. This is objective reality. It is indisputable. As I mentioned in the description to today's live stream, the topic for today came to me through a number of related circumstances. The first being the release of Guillermo Del Toro's Frankenstein. But even more profoundly was the passing of the wife of a good friend of mine. She had a very rare and aggressive form of cancer, and she passed away earlier in the week, and the celebration of life and the funeral and burial was the next day on Saturday. And so the subject of death was very much on my plate and in my face, unavoidable this week. And specifically, how we face death. How we face death on the path is very much our relationship with it and its capacity to teach us. Because death is many things, including the great equalizer and the great teacher. It's the great equalizer because no mortal can defeat it. And it is the great teacher because through death we can come to know everything. It is the process of dying which reveals. And we have explored this aspect of the phenomena of death before. And I've often quoted Samael Weor, who said, we can learn very little from the phenomenon of birth, but from death we can learn everything. The veil is lifted through the process of death. Physical death, naturally, but also metaphysical death, psychological death. A veil is lifted through the process. And so, because we seek knowledge, and we seek self-evident experiential knowledge specifically, and we wish to know that which is beyond the veil, it is self-evident that whatever process we undertake to seek that which is beyond the veil, that process must be one which lifts the veil. So all those self-styled spiritual aspirants who claim to be spiritual and claim to have knowledge and claim to be enlightened and awake and they're already gods and so on and so forth, their minds filled with mystic pride and nonsense. If they deny death and they do not practice the Aum of life, the analogous ultimate methodology, and they do not seek to eliminate the obscurations to genuine knowing because they claim that such elimination is unnecessary, or worse, they project it and say, oh, the desire to eliminate ego is ego, which is just a passive-aggressive gaslighting and a reversal and a projection. But it's clever and it's insidious at the same time. But of course, that's what the ego is. So, and remember, the ego is what fears death. Fear is the primal survival instinct. Its algorithm is by design to avoid death at all costs. And that's why so many on the spiritual path avoid it and avoid even discussing it and avoid even its existence. It's a non-starter. You can't even begin to have the conversation with them. Because I don't want to hear it, I don't want to hear it, I don't want to hear it. Because they believe, they've been hypnotized into believing that it's not real, that it doesn't exist. when we encounter our own mortality, when it becomes real for us, though we have tried all our life to avoid it, when we lay on our deathbed and we begin to contemplate and comprehend that the end is near, that approach of the inevitable, the end of the line, so to speak, has this profound effect on the consciousness and on the personality and the individual who is experiencing it. Countless individuals have had moments of clarity, profound epiphanies, comprehension of mysteries which have plagued them their entire life. The deathbed is at once a window and a portal. It's a confessional. And in comic books, Wonder Woman has the magic lasso, the lasso of truth. The deathbed has that same power, that death has a way of, when it arrives at our doorstep, at the threshold, you know, that archetype of the Grim Reaper who shows up with his scythe, and he's coming to collect a soul and ferry it to the other side of the river Styx. When death comes knocking at our door, we can no longer avoid it. And its presence in the immediacy of it, the eternal now, that we have tried to delay it and avoid it, etc., etc., but now it's here. Somehow, intuitively, we know that we can't hide any longer. There's no place to hide. We can't avoid it any longer. And that surrendering at last to the inevitability brings with it this acceptance which finally makes us honest with ourselves. And as we are honest with ourselves, we might be very honest with those around us. As you may recall, my father passed away back in August. And he too, on his deathbed in the hospital, did a reversal, had an epiphany. And he realized that he had not wasted his life, but that he had lived a life that was filled with toil and perhaps a lot of unnecessary, superfluous hardship, a lot of energy and effort, thrown away, pearls cast before swine, as it were. Because it was on his deathbed that he realized. He said, I worked so much, I worked so hard, and this for what? I've I've got nothing to show for it. I've got nothing to take with me for which I worked, and the world just took and took and took and took and took from me and just used me up. Wore me down, wore me out. I'm worn out, I'm spent, and I've got nothing to show for it. And he turned to me. This is the man who, for 50 years, was lecturing me on what I needed to do and how I needed to do it, and that I needed to get a good job and a good career that made a lot of money and have financial security and and assets and a home and a this and a that, right? All the things that he did. And for 50 years, he was telling me to do the same thing. Now, on his deathbed, he turned to me and said, don't make the same mistakes I did. For 50 years, Oliver, and in his life, for 86 years, he had lived his life a certain way, from a certain point of view, from a certain philosophy, from a very pragmatic, down-to-earth, materialist point of view, a very worldly outlook and philosophy about how it is we must be in the world. But when we're approaching the threshold, and we are on a kind of like a ride in Disneyland, or like a funhouse ride, and we're coming to the end of the ride, but you know how those rides work. You don't control the ride. And you're coming to the end of the funhouse, right? The doors are about to open, and you're at the end of the ride. That realization brings with it a whole different perspective. This is a near universal experience for individuals of all creed and culture, of all religion, of all tradition, in all four corners of the globe. This is not some unique uh, esoteric phenomenon that I'm talking about. You have also experienced family members or have heard stories of those who are close to you, or family members or friends, acquaintances, who likewise expressed profound regret or experienced profound revelation, insight, and have done 180-degree turns in their thinking and outlook and perspective, and I finally see, I finally know what it's all about. And this is universal truth and a shared human experience which exists as an archetype in our stories. The cathartic moment that many a tragic character experiences, where they have that moment of revelation, where they comprehend their actions and their tragic flaw, which precipitated the events of the story. And now, at the precipice of their final demise, they are given a chance in the classic archetypal form of drama we call tragedy, that the character is given an opportunity by the playwright to share that revelation with the audience, with the world. That I've seen the light. I repent my ways. I regret all the pain and suffering that I caused everyone because of my pride, or because of my vanity, or because of my greed, or because of, whatever. It is that moment of redemption before the tragic hero dies. But it is the moment of death, the moment of imminent demise, that the hero is given that opportunity to express and share what death has revealed to them. The imminent death, the promise of death, the arrival of death. And as I have said many, many times, imagine having that magic power available to you now. At whatever age you are at, if we presume that you have a number of years ahead of you, perhaps even a few decades left in your life, between now and the end, when you know, if you are given that opportunity, if you do not die suddenly in a car crash, but even then you might have a moment where your life flashes before your eyes. But in any case, between your inevitable impending demise, which could be years or decades away, wouldn't it be powerful and preferable to have the power of that clarity, of those insights available to you here and now? It's a worthwhile question to ask yourself. What would I do if I could reveal the meaning of life, and if I could review the whole of my life and everything I've done up until this point, and be shown and realize comprehensively what it all means and whether or not it was meaningful? That is, whether or not I had fulfilled what I'm here to do, or whether or not the track that I am on and the trajectory that I am on moving forward is what I in fact came here to do, or if I'm off track, if I'm going in a different direction, or if I'm going in a direction that I will one day regret upon my deathbed. Those who avoid death and say death doesn't exist, they might say, oh, I don't need that. I know that I'm on the right track. I know this and I know that and I know everything. and I know who I am, and don't tell me that I'm on the wrong track, and blah, 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 blah. Okay. But don't blame me if a year or 5 years or 10 years or 20 or 30 or 40 years from now, when you're on your deathbed, don't say we didn't warn you. And don't shake your fist at God and everybody else that they didn't tell you or they didn't warn you. Or that they didn't prepare you or they didn't tell you to prepare. Because the short answer is we don't know. Not everything. And believe it was Socrates, I believe I just shared a quote not long ago this afternoon. I believe it was Socrates who said that recognition of ignorance is the first step towards wisdom. You see, it is death which reveals. Specifically, the death of belief, the death of ignorance, the death of hypnosis. Because that is precisely, hypnosis and ignorance are precisely which prevent us from seeing and prevent us from knowing. And they do so primarily by making us believe that we already know, to make us think we know everything. And really, that's what mystic pride is. The belief that we are greater than what we are, and the belief that we know more than what we do, and the belief that the I, the mortal, has a place in the supernal worlds beyond the veil. This is why the so-called spiritual in the New Age avoid death like the plague and claim that it doesn't exist. They have to say that. Why? Because they also all believe that they're going to 5D ascension. They think they themselves, with the personality and everything that they hold dear, is going to ascend, I use in air quotes, to the fifth dimension. So they can't believe in death. Death cannot exist for them. And even if they rationalize and say, no, there's no such death, there's only transformation. So this is another clever way of, it's a euphemism really, a clever way of avoiding death by massaging it and morphing it into this nebulous, strange sort of thing where, well, of course, I'm not going to exist physically anymore, but I'm going to transform into this ethereal, astral, whatever. But this fantasy allows them to cling to their identification and attachment to themselves. That somehow in this transformation they will remain intact. That they will remain. I will ascend. Of course, I won't have a physical body, but that won't matter, especially if they've done psychedelics or have had near-death experiences or experiences in the astral plane, they believe that they are having those experiences. And so naturally, they like, well, now I know what happens after, I die. And to some degree, there's some truth in that. But the ego, the I, cannot cross the barrier any more than your physical body can. This self, this personality, it's bound to this realm. I've used the analogy many, many times. Mario does not leave the Nintendo cartridge. It's you, the player, who puts the controller down and shuts off the machine. Mario stays in the Nintendo, in the machine. And we know that when you play Mario, Mario can die. You, the player, don't die, but Mario dies. And that's how you know that the game is over. And in fact, ask anyone who plays video games, like the old school video games, how you die and why you died is how you learn to get better at the game. If you jump the wrong way at the wrong time and die, well, now you know not to jump that way at that time again. As a very basic example. This puts death back into the realm of the great teacher. Especially when we are walking the path of the razor's edge, on the edge of a cliff. It's death that makes us pay a great deal of focus and attention to where we are and what we are doing. When we're walking on the edge of a cliff, or rock climbing, mountain climbing, doing any of these sorts of dangerous activities. Like last week, we were watching the people mountain biking down those treacherous paths. The possibility of death puts focus back into the moment and on life, puts us back into the life that we are experiencing now. But the ego fears death. And so for as long as there have been people under the influence of ego, there has been a search, a quest to conquer death. And in fact, depending on the particular expression of any particular religion, many religions and spiritual traditions promise that they will give unto their followers and practitioners the means or the methodology to conquer death. conquering death has been a preoccupation and pastime of humanity since the beginning. And we'll get into that more in just a moment. But first, we have Benjamin says, when it comes to the when it comes to the meaning of life, I find myself returning to King Solomon's conclusion. Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. For God will bring every work into judgment, including every secret thing, whether good or evil. And he continues, he says, I'm also deeply moved by a reflection attributed to St. John Chrysostom. If you knew how quickly people would forget you after your death, you would not seek in your life to please anyone but God. And he says, yes, that's true. I played Super Mario so much that eventually I learned to run through the entire game without dying once. It really teaches you how to focus and refine your routine until every move becomes second nature. And on that note, when you talk about second nature, that relates directly to your first two quotes. Now, this whole issue around fearing God, a lot of people take exception to that language, that terminology. What Solomon is relaying there is the great law of karma, of cause and effect, which is God's judgment. And that to uphold the commandments is to follow the will of your innermost individuated essence of God within your inner Atman. Because God is not outside of you. God is inside of you. And God is not passively observing your life and your decisions and your choices. And this, again, why Benjamin related the two quotations, because the St. John quotation that you would not seek in your life to please anyone but God means you serve the individuated essence of God within everyone. So you are not seeking to please their egos. You're not kowtowing to their egos and their personalities to gain validation from them and recognition from them and accolades and praise. You're not trying to impress anyone. These are all egotistical desires, and one turns to the ego to fulfill one's egotistical desires. But just like in the East, we have the expression namaste, which essentially means my soul bows before, or from my soul to your soul, peace. That's what it means. It can also mean my soul bows before your soul. This is a way of saying my spirit, my essence of God, recognizes and bows before your essence of God and wishes you peace. So this is going through life seeking nothing but to, quote, please God. But, flattery and or threats or right, breaking any of the commandments, we're engaging on the superficial level, on the level of ego, not on the deeper level, on the level of soul, which is what concerns God. However, the ego invariably makes everything about itself and about the world of form. And so its survival and physical survival, defeating death on that level, is actually a very real enterprise and has been for a long, long time. There are two kinds of medicine, two kinds of healing. There's the healing which deals with the immediate, apparent problem or concern. The dis-ease, the disease, which is acute and causing pain and suffering here and now. The other type of intervention, medical intervention, is prevention. Prevention of disease and prevention of pain and suffering caused by illness. So naturopathic healthcare falls into this category. Same, with homeopathy to a degree, but and Chinese medicine as well, where and born out of that prevention, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, I believe is if you can create healthfulness, then you can mitigate dis-ease. But if you live an unhealthy lifestyle and you wait until you get sick, well, by then the illness has had an opportunity to ramp up to a degree where it's now very difficult to cure. Cancer comes to mind, gallstones, kidney stones, but anything really, diabetes, anything. You can have mild versions of many, many, many different kinds of illnesses and disease. And if you are on a protocol which seeks to always be in homeostasis, or seek to be as close to homeostasis as you can be, which is healthfulness, wellness, then as these little illnesses pop up, you sort of nip them in the bud, because you're observing yourself and you are always seeking that balancing. And so it's easier to treat a disease in its infancy than when it's fully matured and has the height of its power and influence over your body. And you can see how that holistic approach of balance and equanimity and homeostasis is there is something inherently good about that. There's wisdom there. There's this, it seems like the most, the wisest approach. So you eat well, you exercise, you observe yourself, and you seek to maintain that balance within yourself. And this has taken very many forms throughout history, like balancing the humors and all this kind of stuff. But just like any good thing is going to be a target. Any good thing is going to be a phenomenon that becomes the subject and object of envy by the ego. The ego wants the power of that homeostasis. Because ego wants to control. And ego doesn't like change. Ego likes things to be fixed, conditioned, and because it is form. And form likes its form. Once it's identified and attached to a certain form, it wants to maintain that form. So to be seeking homeostasis, the ego says, yeah, we like that idea. We like that. To remain healthy. What? Because that helps us remain alive. So you see where I'm going with this. Ego, the fear of death, comes along and twists this good thing called naturopathic healthcare, health and wellness, homeostasis, prevention, illness and disease prevention. The ego comes along and twists and corrupts it and creates longevity medicine. Because now the ego says, yeah, homeostasis is good. Now let's make it forever. Let's maintain this homeostasis, this health and wellness forever. That is longevity medicine. The search for long life, or longer life, or eternal life. Immortality. The identified and attached ego to the physical being takes that and says, okay, this is our foundation, this homeostasis, this health and wellness, everything, this is our foundation. Now we're going to ratchet it up. We're going to crank it up to 11, and we're going to maintain this forever, or as long as we possibly can. We're going to drag it out. And thus we're going to defeat death. And defy the laws of physical reality. So this is the impetus behind Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. The good Dr. Frankenstein, his father was also a physician, but his father was unable to save his mother, who dies when Frankenstein is still a young boy. And he doesn't get along very well with his father. His father is very strict upper crust, nobleman and physician. And he's very, very strict with his son Victor. But when he fails to save his wife, Victor's mother, Victor becomes very bitter, and he he sort of vows to himself, he promises himself that I will defeat death. There's a scene in the film that um, between Victor Frankenstein and his father, played by oh gosh, the actor's name, his last name is Dance, but and he confronts his father. Why didn't you save her? And his father says, doctors cannot defeat death. And Victor says, I will. One day I will. And then we cut to the future when Victor Frankenstein is defending his papers and his theories against a panel of other professors at the academy, and there's a whole the gallery is filled with students and whatnot and observers, and he has prepared a presentation, a display of an experiment, and he's got a partially reconstructed torso of a deceased individual, and he puts current through it, and by putting current through it, it reanimates, it comes alive to a degree. Well, we all know the story more or less. Guillermo del Toro's version of Frankenstein is actually quite good, all in all, overall. It's dreamlike, it's not hyper realistic, sorry, it's not hyper naturalistic. It is hyper realistic in the sense of it's larger than life. It's very, I, I don't want to go so far as to say it's melodramatic, but it takes Mary Shelley's Frankenstein and raises it to a level of fantasy where it's like a dream. It feels a lot like, and it's gothic in its portrayal. It has the feeling of like the Phantom of the Opera, and the colors that he uses, and the art design, and his castle, that he does, where he runs his experiment with the giant tower and everything. It's very gothic in that sense, but it's not gothic in a dark sense, because there's lots of spatterings of color that give it life, and which in a very real way mirrors or mimics or alludes to what Frankenstein is seeking to do, to reanimate the dead by injecting it with the fire, with color, right, with light again. And so the film is like that. It's this dark gothic horror in the tradition of Mary Shelley, but Guillermo del Toro injects his own style into it, and it elevates, it raises the subject matter out of the dark gothic horror or naturalistic kind of trying to tell the story in that way, and raises it to like hyper reality, hyperspace, even like you could say to the astral plane. It's because it's dreamlike, and in that space we are less absorbed with the carnal aspects of the story of Frankenstein taking body parts from a bunch of different deceased corpses and hacking them together to create the monster. And Guillermo del Toro is clearly less interested in that aspect of the story. He is interested more on the astral level, on the emotional level, the psychological level, and the relationship between fathers and sons, because the monster is Frankenstein's creation, just as Victor is a creation of his father. He's his father's son. And so in creating the monster, he becomes the father's monster. The monster refers to him as father. And if you are familiar with the story, you know that in the course of events, Frankenstein pursues the monster. Frankenstein decides that the monster must be eradicated. And he pursues him all the way up to the North Pole. But at the same time that he's pursuing the monster is pursuing him. So at the same time that he's pursuing the monster, he's also running from the monster. He's running from his own creation. And there's this duality. This is something that the rational mind finds it difficult to grasp. Who's hunting who? But consciously, you can grasp and comprehend it. And there's a line in the film where the monster actually says to Frankenstein, "You may be my creator, but I will be your master." And in that one line, Guillermo del Toro, that one line is like the pivot point on which the entire narrative balances, because the whole story up to that point was Victor Frankenstein deciding that he's going to defeat death in an act of spite and anger and vengeance against his father, the prodigal father, like who he hated, who mistreated him and everything else. And his father failed, let him down, failed to save his mother. So he will undertake the ultimate act of rebellion against his father, and he will defeat death. And he does so, or he imagines that he will do so, by cobbling together bits and pieces, parts, spare parts from cadavers. And he will inject them with energy. And he will give new life that way. And he creates this monster. this, even though Guillermo del Toro, in interviews and whatnot, discusses this as, because he also had a difficult relationship with his father. And so in the narrative, in the film, there's a level between fathers and sons. But I propose to you that on the esoteric level, the true meaning of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein and the true story and why it has endeared for so long and why it is archetypally so powerful is because Frankenstein's father is an analog to God. Right? He's a symbol of God. God the Father, who exerts a lot of tough love on Victor. He shows Victor sternness and you know, and he's hard on Victor. He doesn't coddle Victor, and you know, he wants Victor to grow up to be a strong man. But when he fails to save his mother, when his mother becomes ill, she doesn't become ill, she dies in childbirth, giving birth to Victor's younger brother. And when Victor's father fails to save her, that's the same as one of us shaking our fist at God when one of our loved ones dies. Why did you let them die? Why didn't you spare them? Why didn't you save them? Where was the mercy? And then the trauma of that as a child is like, one day I will defeat death. I'll show you, God. You think you can give life and take life willy-nilly? I'll show you. I'm going to make life that you cannot take. Right? It's shaking our fist at God, saying, I will pardon me while okay. So and so, but that is the defiance and the rebellion, the rebellion, not just of a boy against his father, right? But an ego against God. Right? So if you recall high school English class, right? The different conflicts: man versus man, man versus nature, man versus himself, and man versus God. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein is man versus God. Because God has the power to give life and to take it. And that is the power that Victor Frankenstein covets. He envies God and he's angry at God for taking his mother away from him. So he is going to take the power of death away from God. And the only way to do that, to take the power of death away from God, is to give himself, discover the power of how to give life to the dead. That which God thinks that he has taken, he is going to defeat God's ability to kill, to take life, by being able to give life back to the dead. To give life is the answer of how to defeat death in Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. So the monster becomes that. Now, the significance of why the monster is cobbled together from all of these corpses, right? All of these aggregates. Victor Frankenstein aggregates all of these parts into this whole and then pours energy into it, all of his passion and energy and literally electricity into it. And he gives it life and it comes alive. But it can only speak one word, and that's Victor. It speaks Frankenstein's name. That's all. The monster at the outset can only speak Frankenstein's name. Victor, Victor, Victor. And the genius of this, the poetic mastery of that dynamic, is that, and this has always been true in the book, but especially in Guillermo Del Toro's adaptation of the book, his vision, as dreamlike in hyperspace as it is perfectly attuned to the metaphysical layers of the narrative and the themes. This is a soul battling with God, and how does he rebel? How does a soul rebel against the God? Ego. He takes psychological aggregates and fuses them together and pours his energy into it and gives life to a false self, the monster. And the monster, all it can do is speak Frankenstein's name back to him. Victor, Victor, Victor. And it starts to drive Frankenstein mad. He believes that he's failed. He believes that he's created an ignoramus, a dumb brute, incapable of advanced thinking. He's animated a living creature, but it's dumb. All it can do is say one word, and it's like, and the more the monster says Victor, the more it drives Frankenstein mad, because the word Victor means he who has won. And remember, Frankenstein is committing an act of rebellion. He is waging a revolutionary war against God, against nature. Because that's another level, in God, man versus God, man versus nature, because, as I was saying, death is a part of nature. It's unavoidable. So these multi levels, multi layers is another reason why archetypally the story is so compelling. Because Frankenstein is waging a war, a rebellion, a revolutionary war against God, against the laws of nature, and against humanity itself, against his own humanity. And he's created this monstrosity, this simulacrum out of all of these aggregates, these psychological aggregates. He's created a false self, the embodiment, an analog, a mirror of the ugliness inside of him. the envy, the anger, the fear that was inside of him, that's what drove him to create physically in corporeal space a living, breathing, flesh and blood extension of his ego. But all it can do is mirror back to him, Victor, Victor, Victor. And it teases Frankenstein, it pokes him, it mocks him. Not because the monster is mocking him, but his own name becomes an anathema to him because he's failed. He believes he's failed. But the word victor means success, victory. And so the monstrosity just wants to have a connection with the Father. He just wants connection. He just wants to be loved by his Creator. He wants to unite. He wants to be held by his Creator, like any child. Like any child would say, Papa, Mama. But you see, Frankenstein introduces himself to the monster as Victor, Victor. Doesn't say father or papa or whatever. He says Victor, Victor. So the monster says Victor. The same way a child says mama or papa. But because the expectations that Frankenstein has, right? When last week we were talking about disappointment and distress and expectations, right? Frankenstein expects him to have created this super being with super intelligence. But all he does is say Victor, Victor, Victor. So he's being mocked by his own creation. And it starts to drive him mad. I'll continue in a moment, but first, Azazel is here with a comment. He says, it is hard turning to God when an ego takes over, but it is good to recognize that such ego has taken over the driving wheel in that regard. Well, we're actually getting to that. We're getting to that because in the course of events, in the course of the story, and I don't want to we'll get into that. There's the Victor's brother's fiance, Elizabeth. She finds the monster and starts having interactions with the monster, and he learns her name. And in the course of events, and then there's Christoph Waltz's character, who's the financier. There's a whole series of events that results in Victor Frankenstein deciding that he's created an abomination and that his whole enterprise was folly and it was evil and it was on some level he realizes that he is the monster and that he burns down his tower and everything else, but his monster escapes and avoids destruction because he decides he's going to destroy the monster. But before that happens, or when the monster returns and demands that Frankenstein make him a companion because he's alone in the world, the monster recognizes that he is a monster. He learns very quickly he goes out into the wilderness, into the forest. He comes across a cabin, and in that cabin, there's an old blind man. And being blind, he cannot judge the monster to be a monster. In fact, he calls him the spirits of the woods. And you can watch the film on Netflix, and it'll fill in all the plot points. I don't want to get bogged down on the in the details of the story. What matters here are the archetypal symbols that are playing out to deliver us the esoteric truth. And so the monster learns language, and he receives, kindness and compassion and love and wisdom and knowledge from the old hermit, which is in the hero's journey, right? The way Guillermo del Toro tells the narrative, he tells it from the point of view of both Frankenstein and the monster, which is very interesting. It's very unique way of showing that on film. So the monster himself has a kind of hero's journey, but so does Frankenstein, and the two journeys come together in the climax at the North Pole. So when the monster returns to his creator and demands that his creator create for him a companion that's like him, this has direct echoes of Adam and Eve, by the way. That no creature, no creation wants to be alone, wants to that you're, as a creator, you can't create singularly. And if you recall, when we talk about the creation of the universe and the unfolding of the universe, you can't create one thing. If you only create one thing, nothing will exist. And remember, I talked about 1111. That's a whole other topic of conversation, but that's being mirrored in the creature's insistence that Frankenstein create for him a companion, a bride, and a companion. But of course, Frankenstein refuses. And when he refuses, the monster becomes enraged. And at that moment, he says that line where he says, "You may be my creator, but I will be your master." And no matter what Frankenstein tries to do to kill the monster always comes back to life, because the monster is an embodiment of Frankenstein's ambition. And his ambition was to defeat death, to enable eternal life, to create. And so his creation, the monster, cannot die. Every time it confronts death, it regenerates. So the monster says, "I will now be your master." That which we create is a monster that we cannot kill. And it turns around and says, "It will be our master." Does this sound familiar? It's called our egos, the demons that haunt us. We created them. They are our karma. They are the living embodiments, metaphysical entities, which are the manifestation of our past mistakes, our defects and vices, our ambitions, our desires, our cravings and aversions, and our defiance of God. Coming back to what Benjamin said, when he's quoting scripture here, and King Solomon and John Christum. But when he says, let us follow the Ten Commandments, that's the will of God. But when we rebel, when we shake our fist, and we say, no, I'm going to take from God his power, God's ability to take life, I'm going to take that away from him by creating the power of everlasting life. And that's what the monster represents. This grotesque abomination cobbled together of all these psychological aggregates, and it cannot die. It will not die. And it wants a companion. At first, it wants to be with Victor. It wants to be with its father, its creator. But Frankenstein says, no, it rejects it. Well, then give me another companion to be with. And Frankenstein says, no, I'm not going to do that again. When Frankenstein doesn't give in to the demands and desires of ego, what does it do? It says, then I will be your master. I will haunt you. I will chase you to the ends of the earth until you give me what I want. Anybody who suffers from addiction, anybody who suffers from, indeed, like any kind of possession. I can't run from the entity that's responsible for epilepsy in me and my depression. How many people suffer from debilitating chronic depression or anxiety or any number of other forms of mental illness, voices in their head, schizophrenia, multiple personalities? And it follows you wherever you go. And it wants to be your master. That's your ego, your desires. It wants what it wants. And when it doesn't get what it wants, it rages. And for me, when my demon of fear rages in the subconscious mind, it drains me of all my energy, and that's how I experience depression. But I am its creator. I created it. And so Frankenstein embarks on a quest to kill the monster, but he soon discovers that he can't kill it. Because he can kill it, but it'll always come back. It'll always come back, and it keeps haunting him, keeps haunting him, and keeps coming after him. So he decides that if he goes far enough away from everybody else, right, then at least he can be in hell, but he doesn't have to involve anybody else. And that's where the film's climax takes place. It's also the opening act, the prelude of the film, because that's where we start out in the Arctic with a ship caught in the ice and a monster on the horizon and a man with his dog sled team who is taken aboard the ship, and he tells his tale to the captain. And that's how the story begins. But Guillermo Del Toro does something beautiful in the end, in the climax of the film, when the monster eventually makes it aboard the ship. And he confronts Frankenstein. And the ship's captain, who has heard the tale, is there to witness what takes place. And it's there when Frankenstein is essentially on his deathbed that the monster confronts him, and he finally sees the truth that he was the monster, and he essentially asks the monster for his forgiveness. And the monster forgives him, and they have a moment of reconciliation. But it's the conscious comprehension of the monster. The monster has taught Frankenstein what he needed to learn from it. And following that comprehension, that awakening, that enlightenment, Frankenstein dies. And now the monster has reconciled with his creator, and his creator is gone. The monster basically is shown, Guillermo del Toro shows him walking off into the light, into the sunset, or the 24-hour light at the North Pole. In summertime anyway. So he's just walks into the sun, into the light, into the fire. Because once we have comprehended an ego, once what the demon needed to fulfill was fulfilled, and the lessons we needed to learn from our monster that we created had been learned, and the monster within us dies. The monster within us dies, so the monster can now return to the light of the Holy Spirit, the light of the Divine Mother, the light and fire of the Christ. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. There's one other part of the movie that I just want to allude to, back to where the monster was confronting Frankenstein and speaking the word, his name, Victor, 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 over and over and over again. What came to mind in that scene and discussing that scene is a similar scene from the movie The Princess Bride, where Inigo Montoya finally confronts Count Ruben. And Count Ruben, the six-finger man, who murdered Inigo Montoya's father. And if you recall from the movie, Inigo says, when I find the six-finger man, I will tell him, hello, my name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die. And there's that iconic scene from The Princess Bride where Inigo and Count Ruben are finally having the duel that was foreshadowed near the beginning of the movie. And Mandy Patinkin, the actor, he just repeats the line over and over and over. Hello, I am Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die. And Count Ruben says, "Stop saying that!" Like it's driving him mad. It's driving him mad. You may be interested to know that why there are so many revenge stories in cinema and in literature. Another great revenge story is The Count of Monte Cristo. Famous, beloved, you know, and there's a great film adaptation of it as well. Um, oh, but I'm so terrible with names. I can't remember the actors' names in it. Doesn't matter. And then there's Gladiator, right? Ridley Scott's Gladiator. That's also said to be a revenge story, right? And you might say, well, yeah, but isn't vengeance, doesn't Jesus say turn the other cheek? Like, isn't vengeance looked down upon from a spiritual perspective, from an esoteric perspective? And I'll get to that in just a moment, but I just noticed there's a chat here. Azazel says, I had problematic anxiety which lasted for months and days without end. So our focus now is not to give it any more power to the best of our ability. But if you do feel fear on the surface, and you do feel the many faces of fear, you want to observe, you want to remain in observation of it at all times. You don't want to indulge it, you don't want to feed it your energy or your power, but you also don't want to avoid it. You want to be able to observe, but observe at a distance, right? Observe passively without identification or attachment. It's the identification and attachment which gives ego their power, not the observation. Unless the observation becomes an obsession, where you can't take your eyes off of it, so to speak, and you stop observing everything else. So when it starts monopolizing your attention, you know, like your cell phone that's constantly acting up because it wants attention. So we want to be, it's a balancing act, it's a dance, right? You want to observe but not indulge, and you want to observe but not obsess, and not allow yourself to get roped into like a terrible two who's misbehaving just because he wants attention. So just remembering that, because anxiety is fear, and fear has many different faces. So by being able to observe the many different ways that your anxiety can manifest in different forms, and not just subconsciously, because that's what anxiety is, a subconscious fear, but we feel it on the surface as anxiety. But all the ways in which fear manifests on the surface, but it'll be in many different forms, because he has many faces, many masks that he wears. So coming back to the duel and the revenge plots, and say, why is it then that we are so enamored with vengeance and revenge stories? And the reason is because all of these stories are parables. They're analogies, sorry, allegories, but also analogies. The revenge story is analogous to karma. And they are allegories of the great law of the universal justice. So when Maximus, when his family is murdered by Commodus, Commodus means desirous one. Um, I did, I wrote 2 blogs two blog articles on Gladiator many, many years ago now, and I'm pretty sure that I've done a live stream talking about it in all its detail. But when Gladiator kills Commodus, yes, it's for I will have my vengeance and everything else, but that's on the surface level. That's the human story, the story of the characters. But Maximus represents the human soul. And Richard Harris's character, Marcus Aurelius, the true emperor of Rome, Commodus, the desirous one, who is his son, murders him. Well, Commodus is a creation of Marcus Aurelius. He's his son. Marcus Aurelius is his father. But Commodus is a monster. And he comes to enact vengeance. He kills his father. That's the innermost being paying the price for past mistakes with the karma, the monster that he's created, his own ego, the desirous one, Commodus, the false self, the ego, which then kills him and assumes the throne to rule over Rome. The ego, the desirous one, Commodus, supplants the being, the Atman, to rule over the empire of Rome. And the only one who can restore justice and restore Rome to the light and restore the wishes of Marcus Aurelius is Maximus, the human soul, who has to come and defeat Commodus. And by defeating Commodus, he can restore the will of Marcus Aurelius, that Rome become a republic again. And at the beginning of the film, Marcus Aurelius names Maximus the defender of Rome. I will name you the defender of Rome. So the revenge story serves, the surface level revenge story serves a deeper metaphysical esoteric narrative going on. Rome is one psyche. It's the universal psyche. It's the universal human condition. And who rules Rome? This is the question and the dynamic that's playing itself out. In the same way that Frankenstein and the monster, and that dynamic is playing itself out. But it's a dynamic that's a universal truth. It's the human condition playing itself out in a narrative. And you have two very, very, very different movies. Two very different stories. And yet, fundamentally, if you strip away the surface, you get down to very similar themes of life and death and control and domination and rebellion, a son's rebellion against his father, and the ego that creating a monster that then wants to be the master and rule, and it's there's a reason why certain movies and certain stories are so beloved and stand the test of time, and people keep remaking them over and over and over and over again. Because generation after generation after generation after generation, the story remains relevant And it's not relevant because what's on the surface. It's relevant because of what it is an allegory for is universal truth. It's the human condition, which does not change over time and over space. And death and life and faith and loyalty and fealty and humility and pride and rebelling against the Father and in defiance of death and in defiance of everything. These are all themes that run the course of human experience throughout all of human history. And so when Indigo seeks vengeance on Count Ruben, and he just keeps repeating back, I am Indigo Montoya, you killed my father, prepare to die. It is just him throwing it back in Count Ruben's face. You did this, you did this, you did this. Look at what you caused. Look at what you did. Look at what your past mistakes, your past transgressions. Look at the fruits of your labor. Now, reap what you have sown. And of course, Count Ruben doesn't want to face that. He tells Indigo, stop saying that. Stop saying that. In the same way that Frankenstein tells the monster, say something else. Say anything else. Stop saying my name. Because we don't want to face the truth. We don't want to look in the mirror. We don't want to hear life echoing back to us. The reverberations, the echoes of our past mistakes, our past transgressions. And yet in Gladiator, at the very beginning of the film, Maximus says to his cavalry, brothers, what we do in life echoes in eternity. Echoes in eternity. This is the great irony in Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, when he defies God and says, I am going to defeat death. I will defy you. I will take from you the power to take life by bestowing upon myself the ability to give it and give eternal life. And by giving eternal life to the psychological aggregates, he creates a monster that does not die and speaks his name and echoes his name and haunts him and chases him to the ends of the earth, echoing in eternity. Echoing in eternity. His own monstrosity, which he at once is desperate to kill, but he cannot because it keeps returning. It keeps, the echo won't go away. And he is also desperate to try to get away from it and get as far away from it and as far as away from civilization as he can. He tries to run from it to the ends of the earth, but the monster chases him there. And in the end, it is only death, psychological death, where he sees the light, he accepts the truth, and he reconciles the monster that he is and the monstrosity that he created and all of his wrongs. And he forgives himself. He reconciles this simulacrum, this creation of his ego and his envy and his spite and his anger. As he sees the light, that can go into the light. This is the integration of the shadow. that which the shadow contained in it that we needed to learn once we integrate, right? Now the shadow can dissolve, and it dissolves into the light, because that's the light. It is the light which eliminates a shadow. You cast light on a shadow and the shadow disappears. So all of this brings us to how my friend faced the death of his wife, who, as I mentioned, she had a very rare form of cancer, which was very aggressive, and you might even say vindictive. She was extraordinary in how strong she was and how positive she was in facing this particular monster. And the doctors at Princess Margaret Hospital were somewhat amazed as well by how positively her body was responding to treatment and very, very harsh chemotherapy. But they prepared them for the worst, because this particular form of cancer is known to be very, almost vindictive. And after, years of sort of going like this, like up and down, um, they she had a run where um, things really were looking better and seemed to be on the up and up. And but then about 3 months ago, she went in for a routine checkup, and the cancer had returned, and it had returned with a vengeance. And listening to my friend relay the details of the last few months leading up to the circumstances of her death, it echoed the plot of Frankenstein, and how Frankenstein could not kill the monster. The monster kept coming back, more with a vengeance, like more determined, stronger, more focused, more relentless. And finally, they said, "That's it. Your wife's, her body can't take any more chemo. We've reached. It's like we've done everything we can. She's endured uh, all the courses of treatment that she's going to be able to endure, and while she progressed further than anybody else ever has with this particular kind of cancer. Um, it's returned with a vengeance. It's determined. It's relentless, and you have to prepare yourself for a very, very, very difficult um, and excruciating 3 months, because that's how long they gave her to live." And then, skipping over some details, one day she collapses. And my friend, of course, being a husband and, looking after her for 3 years with cancer and everything, he's on the ball. He immediately jumps and he starts performing CPR on his wife, and he manages to resuscitate her. And he calls 911. The ambulance comes and they rush her to the North York Hospital, General Hospital, and they of course do the analysis and do all the scans, like they do CT scan, MRI scan, and everything else. And it turns out that they she had a massive hemorrhaging in the brain, and probably something like a brain aneurysm or something like that, but just a total massive hemorrhage. And that um, they they told him that she was probably already gone. Well, I mean, like when he resuscitated her, so it's very likely she felt no pain, and um, and in the end, she was surrounded by her family when her breath finally gave out. Um, and of course, he was relaying all of this in the eulogy to everyone who had come for the funeral. But privately, when he and I spoke, he was remarkably at peace with everything, because with she was only 45 years old and they have two young daughters, uh, 6 and 10. And we talked about it. It's her wife dying the way she did. It really had nothing to do with cancer. The doctors and everybody is saying, oh, complications due to cancer. It might have been cancer related or whatever, because she was so weak, no doubt because of the chemotherapy and whatever, right? But here's the thing: as he explained during the eulogy, as her breath gave out at North York General Hospital, the moment she flatlined, the hospital's fire alarm system came on. Ding, 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 3 chimes. And it was like perfectly timed. Just an indication, like the bell, when the bell tolls for thee. Number one, it was her time, but number two, it was like the bells in heaven were ringing the arrival of a daughter, of a soul, of a sister returning home. And when I spoke to him about it and he agreed that for the sake of the children, they didn't have to watch their mother wasting away for 3 months in a hospice somewhere, slowly being eaten away from the inside by cancer. her death was an act of mercy, the way she went, the way she died. And he spoke so beautifully and eloquently, a lovely eulogy from the heart. And it was actually quite remarkable the previous night at the celebration of life, the chapel where they had the services and the viewing, they had to bring in more chairs, and there were people standing around like outside in the hallway and stuff because so many people showed up because she was so beloved and she touched so many lives. It was a very moving, beautiful scene. Everything about the funeral services, the burial, and the evening before, and all the people who came. It was a beautiful. It really was a celebration of life and a celebration of a very strong and courageous soul, and a loving and giving soul who had touched so many lives, and they all came to pay their respects. And it mirrors, it echoes Maximus's words. What we do in life echoes in eternity. Well, how we face death echoes in eternity. And I know my friend, his life would be different. He's very different. He and his wife, rekindled, rediscovered their faith by facing this cancer. They didn't shake their fist at the heavens and shake their fist at God and say, why me? Why us? They leaned into the challenge. They leaned into the the illness. They faced it with courage and with conviction and with faith and humility. And in the end, although they couldn't conquer death, they couldn't defeat it, in the end they were spared the worst in a beautiful act of mercy. God snapped his fingers and she was gone. Instead of the disease dragging it out and making her suffer for months and months and months on end, and her children and her parents and her husband having to watch her waste away slowly and excruciatingly. But there was a case of where, frankly, death was inevitable. It was all but inevitable. They did everything they could according to the latest modern science, and I mean, because they had access to Princess Margaret Hospital, and that's in accordance with their beliefs or what have you. They were like, well, we have access to the top cancer hospital in Canada, so that's where we're gonna go. Um, but in facing death that way, the result is they they it it brought them closer together, and it brought them closer to God. And in terms of my friend, it revealed in many ways to him his true purpose in life. And I know that what flowed through him for those 3 years that he was taking care of his wife and his kids, because as she was having her treatments and being weak and unable to do her day-to-day activities in the same way, he had to become both father and mother. He had to be the husband and the wife. And he took all of that burden and all of those duties on without any hesitation, without any complaint. In other words, in facing that horrible, terrible disease, he, and in reconnecting with his higher self and his innermost intimate Christ, he experienced unconditional love flowing through him into the world. In much the same way that I experienced it for the time that I was looking after my mother as she was dying of cancer. This is the slow, arduous, agonizing expression of death that gives an extended course, an extended degree in knowledge and wisdom, knowledge of oneself, and wisdom of the depths of love and selflessness that we are capable of. When someone we love, someone close to us, is facing the final curtain or facing like a harrowing disease like cancer or whatever the case may be. And we are called to step up. And when we do so, we become the embodiment of that love. And we become a witness to what we are capable of. When we answer the call and we get ourselves out of the way, we don't shake our fist at God, we become God's right hand. We become the gauntlet on that hand. And the will of the Father moves us and moves through us. The hand of fate moves us. Our actions, our words, our presence in the world, in a small way, we become the hand of God. A servant, a worker, a messenger, an extension of God's love, an extension of that selflessness. And we do it selflessly. That is unconditional love. And when it flows through us, and when you experience that and feel that and know that, you have true faith. And you have conquered death. Because no one who answers the call shall be forsaken. No one who does God's work in the world and is a conduit for unconditional love, no one, though we might suffer here in the world as Jesus did, that we do so selflessly for others, for the sake of others, and God's love flows through us into the world, that brings us closer to our own innermost intimate Christ and to God himself. And so we will not be denied. We will not be cast out of heaven. We will not be forsaken. We will not be hung out to dry. God does not betray those who, what's the quote here? Gosh, where is it? Here it is. God does not betray those who would seek in their life to please God and to please everyone they can with the help of God, with the power of God, with God's unconditional love flowing through them into the world. All right. More. Benjamin says, based on what we've talked about so far, life feels a bit like one of those game books where the ending shifts depending on the choices you make. Yet, once those choices are made, everything seems to unfold as if it were already written, much like the scene in The Matrix when Neo meets the Oracle and she tells him he's already made his choice. He isn't there to decide, but to understand why he decided. Yes, there is truth in that. There is truth in that, of course. But that doesn't mean he doesn't have a choice, because the whole point of the Matrix, and this is emphasized in the second film when he meets the architect, is that it is precisely choice, it is precisely free will that is the thorn in his side. So you didn't come here to make the choice, you've already made it. You came here to understand why you made it. Yeah, sure, that's true. That's called self-knowledge, to know yourself. But remember, in the book of Job, it's Job who turns away from God. He refuses to accept God's mission for him. And he goes through all of those suffering, all of those trials in order to finally realize and accept. So in the act of trying to remember and trying to understand the choices that we've made, that is the higher self has made for us, in that process, there will be a great deal of denial, a great deal of turning our back away from our destiny. Or at least there could be, there might be. And anybody who's ever experienced anything like a midlife crisis, where you wake up and you realize this is not the life I was supposed to be living, it's precisely because you haven't been living it. And there's many people who experience midlife crises in their 40s. They wake up one day and they say, this is not the life I'm supposed to be living. That means that since the age of 16 or whatever, they've been living a different life than they were meant to. They're not doing what they were meant to do. So they've got a lot of catching up to do. They might still end up in the same place, but that doesn't mean they didn't have a choice along the way, right? So I guess that's the one problem I have with that, with just isolating that quote that way, because choice is absolutely in the Matrix, and it's absolutely in our life in the world, because free will is an absolute law of the universe, and not even God will violate it. So, but Benjamin continues here, and he says, this brings to mind the butterfly effect, where a single action can ripple outward, influencing countless factors and creating an outcome that's uniquely shaped by that specific chain of cause and effect. And that's true. And that's true. And that's correct. Like that's, again, I go back to that quote from Gladiator. What we do in life echoes in eternity. That's just a Heidi Flighty way of describing what the butterfly effect is. The ripples, right? You drop a pebble in a pond and you watch the ripples expanding out until the entire lake has been touched and affected by the one little pebble. And Benjamin says here that story really reflects a kind of mercy. It actually reminds me of this passage. The righteous perish, and no one takes it to heart. Devout people are taken away, and no one understands that the righteous are taken away to be spared from evil. Those who walk upright enter into peace. They find rest as they lie in death. Well, I certainly felt that way about my mom being taken when she was, because she would not have suffered very well all of the woke nonsense and all the other changes that have taken place in the world. Um, so she was spared all of that. So let's talk a little bit about life and death. And how death is a part of life, and also how we are, in some ways, fascinated by it. This last component of today's live stream was inspired just a few hours ago as I was walking in the woods. It's a quite windy day here in Guelph. And as I was walking through the woods, I heard this epic crash. This monumental crack, 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 crash. Some mighty tree fell in the forest. I didn't see it, but you could hear it, and you could hear it throughout the entire conservation area. It just echoed. You know, the sound would have traveled for miles. It was just this enormous crashing sound. And it was just another moment to experience and appreciate the universality of death. Here's this mighty tree. It might have already been a dead tree. I don't know. Right? It might have already died, and it was just its husk, its trunk finally being blown over. But the sound of it and everything there was something about it that was it wasn't startling, but the cracking and the collapsing of this enormous monumental noise, this like this weird biological trumpeting, heralding the fall of a mighty tree. There was something very satisfying in it. Profound, but satisfying. A child of the earth returning to the earth. You know, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. So just inspired by that, the remainder of my walk, I took the opportunity to continue contemplating that. And then when I returned home, I decided to do a little investigation. And I don't know if you're familiar with something called ASMR. But I actually pulled a number of videos that I want to share with you. And I want to see if you have a similar kind of experience. Now, these should have sound. These should have sound. Now, I should be able to make this. Okay. So there shouldn't be any talking in any of these. I tried to select ones that had no talking. I couldn't find videos that were with trees just collapsing on their own. So unfortunately, like some of them, some of this in this first video, we'll have to endure maybe listening to the odd chainsaw here and there. But anyway, we'll work through it. This is only like a minute and a half. Pode. Um, there are hundreds of videos on YouTube of trees falling with that with the cracking sound, the crashing sound. I don't know if any of this does anything for you, but let's take it to something that where on a regular basis, unless you're vegan, um, let's just take a listen to this. Wait, no, here. Things breaking, ice cracking. Um, Azazel says, sounds similar to the rumbling of thunder when trees break and fall. Yeah, so a little bit like thunder. Of course, thunder and lightning, like thunder has its own violent, destructive quality. But then there's also little little things like this. And then people have made videos where they take this to the next level. I guess just before we... Hopefully you're starting to get a theme here. You're starting to sense These are ASMR videos. The visceral sensory auditory response, like, but there's something satisfying about it. Now this one's a little bit longer. This one will take a minute, okay? But we moved like from falling trees and cracking eggs and cracking ice, all of which there's something satisfying about that. If you're in, like, I know Azazel is in a country that has snow and ice in the winter, and I can almost guarantee he enjoys cracking ice on the sidewalk or coming off the car like after an ice storm, just like anybody else. There's something. It's now you don't enjoy cracking ice while you're standing on it and there's a lake underneath, because that can be very frightening if you fall into the icy water. But otherwise, like cracking ice, crumbling things, like all of these sounds. Now, but that's nature, that's natural. You encounter that, right? So there you could say, well, that's obvious, and that's not a big thing. That's not any kind of revelation. But then how do we explain this? So that last one was not natural. There's nothing natural about that. Just think of the time and effort it took to stack all of those glass jars and fill them with colored water and then set up the ramp and everything to watch it all crash. Azazel says, I remember when lightning struck down 10 meters from our house in the middle of the night. It sounded like a grenade exploding in my room and scared the crap out of me. A very effective alarm clock. Okay, all right. Um, so now this one's like less than 20 seconds. Um, so stop breaking. This is, there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, probably thousands of videos, and a lot of them are like little shorts like this. Probably TikTok is completely flooded with these things. People rolling stuff off, like dropping things off of buildings, and like with really good microphones, and really high resolution, and you see they put colored water or powder or whatever inside of them so that the visual impact is maximum, right? It's now, and then look at the next one. Does anybody else find any of this a little strange or a little peculiar? And you're like, what? Like, why do we find it so satisfying to watch things break and and to deliberately break things? Now, and you wonder, and people wonder why cats knock shit off of shelves. And people are complaining, it's like, oh, my damn cat doing this, but and then meanwhile, people are making videos like these, doing what? Rolling things off of buildings and like smashing things and going, ooh, wow. And then you consider, why is it that people like to watch car crashes? And not just car crashes, train wrecks. It reminds me of the Dark Knight, and when Joker says, I'm an agent of chaos. But people love bad news. People love watching car crashes and train wrecks, and YouTube is filled with videos like these.
Don't buy your edge. Go to ChurchillMortgage.com today. Again, ChurchillMortgage.com.
ConsumerAccess.org. Evening Pleasant Lender, 1749 Mallory Lane, Suite
It's like
100.
you can't turn away. It's like you know it's coming, but you can't turn away. Why can't we turn away?
Whoa! Oh shit!
The baby's not too happy with it. Well, look, I'm not going to play you 16 minutes of this, but let's take it another step. Let's take it another step. Let's people will come out to watch a building being demolished. People will come out to watch this. They expect it to be announced publicly so they can come out and watch. Why? Okay. Benjamin says, Azazel says, my favorite sound is probably a crackling fire, especially very large fires where you can even hear the fire. Benjamin says, I think it's because the sound of breaking glass and those thunderous echoes create a kind of adrenaline rush, a tingling sensation that makes you feel more connected and part of the moment. And he continues here, he says, or maybe it's simply that we feel a sense of satisfaction when we witness or hear the conclusion of something. That's an interesting and very euphemistic way of saying death, destruction. And because that's what we're witnessing. That's what we're watching when we when actually this one, you said the sound. Okay, so this next one. All right, you guys can watch this the rest on your own. Here's the thing. There's a reason why Hollywood movies are filled with explosions. There's a reason why there are some people like watching car racing just for the crashes. There's a reason why people like watching hockey for the fights, and there's a reason why people watch like MMA fighting, and there's a reason why Rome had the Circus Maximus and the Colosseum, the gladiatorial Colosseum, hacking off limbs, and if they had gunpowder, rest assured they would figure out a way to have pyrotechnics and explosions in the Colosseum while the gladiators were fighting, exactly like WWE wrestling has pyrotechnics and stuff going off when the wrestlers are coming into the ring at WrestleMania. Destruction. Things breaking down. Entropy. It's things returning to the earth. There's something satisfying about that. Returning. Death, they say death is the liberation of the soul, of the spirit, right? We return. We're free from this physical cage, this prison, this realm. But the substance of mechanical nature, when form returns to formlessness, when all of the material in this building is came from the earth, returns to the earth,
Ты куда ломишься? Титан. Сыр. Ужас.
There's a satisfaction that we
Офигеть.
feel
Сырдым.
viscerally in our ego when we
Біздің не
see
болды? Біздің
the substance imprisoned in some rigid form collapsing and returning to dust, into a cloud of formlessness, back into chaos, into the primordial soup. It's a kind of return. And it's satisfying to that aspect of, there's something about it archetypally that's satisfying in two ways. It's satisfying to the spirit, to the soul, and it's satisfying to viscerally to our mechanical self, our egos. Remember, as above, so below. The aeons long to be reunited with nothing. With just the all-mind, the consciousness with God, the Christ. Where the energy leaves the body, the monad, the spirit leaves the body. And there's a pull in that direction. But that pull is bidirectional, because there's another pull. And that pull is upon our egos, pulling us down, back into the earth. And even though we resist that, because of the fear of death, when we witness other forms, and those forms only exist because of the all-mind of God shaped them. They were designed. They were built. Energy went into shaping and molding and creating these forms. But now that energy is left. That vitality is left. The Creator is left. Now these forms have been liberated from that energy, that Creator, that prison of form, and now they're free to be dust again. They're free to return to the primordial soup. They're free to return to their mother mechanical nature. Because these are very unnatural forms. As above, so below. There's that same impulse, the same archetype. That which is created, there's joy in creation, there's joy in giving birth, there's joy in christening a ship or a building, a grand opening, right? We celebrate the building of these things, but then we also come and we celebrate their destruction. We celebrate births, we celebrate weddings, we celebrate births, and we celebrate deaths. The transition point, the inflection point, twists and turns. But this is what death is. We're witnessing death, the death of a building. Azazel says, if we become too plagued by egos, we won't really feel that death has freed us. No, well, we'll go the other direction. But that's the pull, right? That's the pull. There's something about watching destruction and death and feeling viscerally moved by it, like feeling visceral pleasure in it. That's like, yeah, this is the ego saying this is people being brought down to earth and becoming part of the physical. It's the same way that the angels and the beings in heaven sing when a soul comes home that's liberated from the material, from the body. This is physical stuff being liberated by the interventions of spirit, of intellect, of the mind. There's the return to the primordial soup. Creation and construction, but also release, destruction. There's something satisfying about it. And maybe it is a sense of completion or conclusion. Or maybe it's the return. All of these bricks and stucco and glass and steel evaporating, disappearing into a cloud of dust. They've been liberated from the rigidity of the form that they were in, and now there's like a liberation here, a different kind of liberation, but liberation on the level that mechanical nature experiences it. And we, being both spirit and matter, we partake in that. We materially, physically, we sensoriously, if that's even a word, our sensory perceptions of this is stimulating. And, and movies are filled with explosions, and video games are filled with destruction, and little kids like breaking things and knocking things over just like cats do. And again, this is not hearsay or conjecture, and as you can see, this is not some kind of isolated incident. There are countless videos on YouTube that are just this. Car crashes, building collapses, trees being cut down, people cracking eggs, people breaking glass, smashing TVs, dropping things off of buildings, and it goes on and on and on and on and on. So don't let anybody tell you that death isn't real, that death doesn't exist. If someone is trying to convince me that these buildings still exist, where exactly, how exactly does that building exist? It's a cloud of dust and a pile of rubble. How does the building exist? The building has died. It's collapsed, it's crumbled. The substance of the building is now a cloud of dust and a heap of rubble. This is so ubiquitous and universal. And I was going to, there was one more video that I was thinking about showing you. And hang on one second. I didn't queue it up. Because I ran out of time. Okay. Does it start here? Yeah, okay, let's try this one.
Makes it more fun. I watch television news for one thing and one.
That seems a little quiet. Let's try this one.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I appreciate that. Good to have a little sip of this. The water, I assume, is still safe to drink in New York, huh? Actually, I got to be fair with you. I'm only setting you up a little bit. It's just not a trick question, but it's just a setup because I don't really care about the water, to tell you the truth. I just love to hear the answer to that question. I ask that question everywhere I go. Everywhere I go, I say, how's the water? Haven't gotten a positive answer yet. Not one. Last year, I was in 40 states, 100 cities. Not one audience was able to say to me, yes, enjoy some of our fine local water. It is pure and it is good. Of course, I know a lot of people don't talk that way anymore, but nobody trusts the local water supply. Nobody. And that amuses me. I like that.
Zazel says, a colleague of mine once asked me, how do you know death is real? And I answered, do you want to try? So this is George Carlin's bit on entropy. So let's just, we'll wrap it up with this.
I admit I'm a bit perverted. But it amuses me that no one can really trust the water anymore. And the thing I like about it the most is it means the system is beginning to collapse and everything is slowly breaking down. I enjoy chaos and disorder, not just because they help me professionally. They're also my hobby. You see, I'm an entropy fan. I'm an entropy fan. When I first heard of entropy in high school science, I was attracted to it immediately. When they told me that in nature, all systems are breaking down, I thought, what a good thing. What a good thing. Perhaps I can make some small contribution in this area myself. And of course, it's not just in nature. In this country, the whole social structure just beginning to collapse. You watch. Just beginning now to come apart at the edges and the seams. And the thing I like about that is that it means it makes the news on television more interesting, makes the television news more exciting, makes it more fun. I watch television news for one thing and one thing only, entertainment. That's all I want from the news, entertainment. You know my favorite thing on television? Bad news. Bad news and disasters and accidents and catastrophes. I want to see some explosions and fires. I want to see shit blowing up and bodies flying around. I'm not interested in the budget. I don't care about tax negotiations. I don't want to know what country the fucking Pope is in. But you show me a hospital that's on fire and people on crutches are jumping off the roof, and I'm a happy guy! I'm a happy guy! I'm a happy guy! I want to see a paint factory blowing up. I want to see an oil refinery explode. I want to see a tornado hit a church on Sunday. I want to see people, I want to know there's some guy running to the Kmart with an automatic weapon firing at the clerks. I want to see thousands of people in the street killing policemen. I want to hear about a nuclear meltdown. I want to know the stock market dropped 2,000 points in one day. I want to see people under pressure. Sirens, flames, smoke, bodies, graves being filled, parents weeping, exciting shit. My kind of TV. I just want some entertainment. It's just the kind of guy I am. It's the kind of guy I am. You know what I love the most? When big chunks of concrete and fiery wood are falling out of the sky and people are running around trying to get out of the way. Exciting shit. That's why I watch auto racing. That's the only reason I watch auto racing. I'm waiting for some accidents, man. I want to see some cars on fire. I don't care about a bunch of redneck jack-offs driving 500 miles in a circle. 500 miles in a circle? Children can do that, for Christ's sakes. Doesn't impress me. I want to see some schmuck with his hair on fire running around punching his own head, trying to put it out. I want to see the pits explode. I want to see a car doing a 200-mile-an-hour cartwheel. Hey, where else besides auto racing am I going to see a 23-car collision and not be in the son of a bitch? And if a car flies out of control, lands in the stands and kills 50 spectators, fine, fuck them. Serves them right. They paid to get in, let them take their chances with everybody else. just means more fun for me. More fun for me. Hey, at least I admit it. At least I admit it. Most people won't admit to those feelings. Most people see something like that on television. They'll say, oh, isn't that awful? Isn't that too bad? Lying asshole. Lying assholes. You love it and you know it. Explosions are fun. And hey, the closer the explosion is to your house, the more fun it is. Did you ever notice that? Sometimes you have the TV on and you're working around the house. Some guy comes on television and says, 6,000 people were killed in an explosion today. You say, where? He says, in Pakistan. You say, oh, fuck Pakistan. Too far away to be any fun. But if he says it happened in your hometown, you'll say, whoa, hot shit, come on, Dave, let's go look at the bodies. Let's go look at the bodies. I love bad news. I love bad news. Hey, the more bad news there is, the faster this system collapses. Fine by me. Fine by me. Don't bother my ass. Don't bother my ass none. I'm glad the water sucks. I'm glad it sucks. You know what I do about it? I drink it.
Okay. So this is a very interesting, you have to admit that everything he said is true. I mean, if you're honest, right? Bad news sells, the car crashes, everything he was saying, right? And people were laughing because it was funny, and they were laughing because it was true. But it really makes you wonder about our relationship with death when it's a fundamental tenet of material reality that everything is breaking down, systems are breaking down. And we find it satisfying that they break down. Right, as Azel says, my favorite comedian by far, and Benjamin says, very honest comedian, right? A true legend. But do we not see a kind of strange dichotomy or a paradoxical... We don't like bad things happening to us, but everybody else and everything else can go to hell in a handbasket, and that makes us happy. That's satisfying. That's entertaining to see other people like to the ego. It wants to live forever. It wants to be safe and secure. It's so like the closer the explosion is to your house, the more fun it is, just as long as it's not your house. Just as so long as you aren't in it. There is the cold callousness, and that there's like to take pleasure in destruction. It rules for thee, not for me, I guess. Like it's, and then there are psychopaths who relish other people's suffering and relish other people's pain. They don't have any empathy. This is a feature of mechanical nature and its relationship with death. How we face death, our death, others' death, destruction, things collapsing, and I don't have all the answers. But I ended today with hopefully something that will raise more questions for you, and something for us to all meditate on. Because the very same mechanicity inside of us that fears death relishes and enjoys watching chaos and destruction. Or is it the higher self who enjoys watching chaos and destruction? It's worthwhile meditating on. Where's the source of entertainment? Where is it coming from? Or is there an interface, an interplay? Because clearly, to experience sensations, we have to be conscious. We have to have the consciousness. There's the union, being in the world but not of the world, but we are in the world. And while we're in the world and in these bodies, in these five senses, we experience a certain way, but so does mechanical nature. So does our ego's experience by virtue of the consciousness that they bottled up inside of them. Benjamin says, I think it's part of human nature to have an unconscious pull towards destructive impulses. Isn't that what Freud called the id, with the superego representing our moral instincts and the ego trying to balance the two? So this would, philosophically, we would be talking about order versus chaos. And trying to make order in the world. That would be, but the problem with that philosophical approach is that it denies mechanical regimes like fascism and communism and the archetype of expressed in Star Wars by the Empire. I mean, empire building, right? And order. We're going to bring order to the planet, order to the galaxy, right? But it's all for control. That order is there to control. And that control is dominance. It's fear. Because God organizes, but he leaves his creation to do what it will. So he leaves free will to exist in creation. In other words, there's order in mechanical nature, but there's also chaos and free will to do whatever. But this is the eternal, this is the Tao, right? This is the eternal struggle, the eternal conflict between these different opposites, right? These different dualities. So, but all of this is worthwhile to meditate on, because in all of this is going to be gold nuggets of insight into yourself and into humanity and how we face death. And if you have Netflix, I recommend Guillermo Del Toro's Frankenstein. It's on Netflix. It's a beautifully shot film, so if you can find it in a theater near you, I might recommend you going to see it in the big theater. It was not playing in my town, so I had to watch it on Netflix, but it was fine. And death is the great equalizer, and death is the great teacher. And you cannot advance on the path without it. And you cannot avoid it. There's no avoiding death. And the death of the ego, like popping those bubble wrap every time we pop an ego, like consciousness is released. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. Let the body and materialism and everything that belongs to mechanical nature, including the ego, let it go back. Give unto Caesar that which is Caesar's, and give unto God that which is God's. This is I feel at the crux, at the center of the impulse that we have to reap pleasure from destruction, is that there was a union of God and Caesar in order to build the empire. Because all the energy and the effort and the mind and the will and everything that built it up, but the empire came up out of the earth. And when it collapses, not only does that which came out of the earth collapse back into the earth, but the spirit, the energy, everything that went into that building, that too is released. So it's like coming together and then separation again. It, in many ways, it's the breath, the in breath and the out breath. The destruction is the release, it's the out breath. The construction, the creation, is the union, it's the in breath. And then the release. And Azazel says, fear and lust is still my favorite episode of yours to this day because it is so foundational. Well, so is breathing. And the thing about the ego is the ego has this duality to it where it feels satisfied when it's full and when it's empty. You observe yourself eating. Eating is satisfying, it's satisfying you, and then you're full, right? And then you're satisfied, and then later, hours later, you relieve yourself, and you're emptying yourself, and that too is satisfying. It's in this duality that all of this destruction falls into place, and why we are so stimulated by things breaking and cracking and the sounds of that and the visions of that and the visualizations of that. It's just something that, again, was literally came across my path in the woods, and it inspired me to tag on to the end of today's live stream, talking about death and how we face it, because there are aspects. It's not quite as simple as we just fear death, because there's parts of us that actually enjoy it, and chaos and destruction, and it's good to know yourself. It's good to know those parts. And if we can get it down to a foundational level, right? So, like the fear and lust. Well, again, the masculine and feminine aspects of sexuality, feeling full and feeling empty. That's very much a part of fornication and lust, to be sure. Being filled and being empty. And if you meditate on that and all the different aspects of that, you will understand the echoes of this particular dynamic, the in-breath and the out-breath, feeling full and feeling empty. And if life is being full, then death is the release. It's being empty again. So again, something to contemplate, something to meditate on in the coming week. Speaking of which, I hope you have an excellent week and be safe, be kind to yourself and those you love. Thank you for spending the afternoon with me again, as always. And I look forward to seeing you again soon. Until then, be well and inferential peace. All right, take care, everyone.